because they're buying the property at low market rent, so the purchase price is going to reflect that, but you can add value to that property almost instantly if you have the ability to raise rents as soon as you take ownership.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Mortgages Made Easy podcast. We are joined again by MJ Agustini. MJ and I have been talking about this for years. We've been talking about how she loves helping clients build wealth using investment property. And we're finally getting to address this head on. So MJ, tell me why it's important to you to help clients in this way, and how do clients benefit?
Well, thank you, Dave, for inviting me back on the podcast. It's great to be with you again. And of course, I love talking about investment property. And I get very excited when, especially our first time buyers of investment property come into the marketplace. It's great to start with maybe a condo or a 2 to 3 family home where you can get some added income. And it's even better if, they lived in one of the units and rented them the second or third one out. It's a great way to get your feet wet in the residential real estate rental market.
Hmm. And the advantage is that you get the power of leverage, right? Because it's not like when you buy a stock, you've got you can do margin and everything, but when you buy a stock, if you wanted to buy $1 million worth of stock, you would need $1 million. But if you want to buy a $500,000 property, let's say a three-family property for $500,000, if you're going to live there, you really don't need that big of a down payment. But if you buy well, and obviously that's where a great realtor like MJ Agustini comes in. But if you buy well, now you have the power of leverage because you may be putting down 3.5%, 10%, 20%, 30%. But even if you're putting down 30%, you're as the property appreciates, now you're getting a multiple appreciation to your initial investment. So it makes it very powerful and makes it very strong. So let's get right into it. Um, let's talk about what I think of most people buying, which is a 2, 3, maybe a 4, but I'm seeing people buying 2 and 3 family homes. And as you identified, there's really two ways of going in, but let's talk about just buying a pure investment property. And we'll circle back and talk about the advantages of buying it to live in as well. So the first thing you need to know is that you've got to find the property. You've got to select the property. What does that look like today in Connecticut?
Well, when you're looking for investment property, obviously, you're looking for a property that's going to throw off enough cash to pay your mortgage and give you a return. You want to be in a location where there's plenty of employment and jobs so that you have plenty of tenants to be able to choose from to put into your building. You definitely want a location near highways for commuters, have accessible parking in case they do use vehicles. Here in Connecticut, we have a lot of the 6 blocks or even the 4 blocks, have some definitely good off-street parking. So you want to know about the physical characteristics as well as the environment statistics, because those are really important to your decision making when you're trying to figure out cash flow and rate of return.
Hmm. And I say, particularly with investment property, the first key is buying well because um, there's because you're leveraging your money to buy the property, you want to be aware of the market characteristics. Is the market stable? If you had to project 5 years out, will it be worth the same, more, or less? Obviously, if you thought the property was going to go down in value, you would be far less likely to buy it. Um, But you know, having a great realtor who then helps you go through that process of selecting the property is huge. So now you have a property selected. And I think you and I have spoken about this number of times in the past. You got to have your ducks in a row before you start making an offer. And that what that means is you have to have financing in place, not necessarily approved for the mortgage, but pre-approved for the mortgage so that the seller feels comfortable selling to you rather than to someone else. So let's talk about that because some of the options that might be available for a primary residence will not be available for a pure investor. So, for example, you may have somebody who's a veteran, a lot of veterans, a lot of active duty military in Connecticut.
Mhm.
But if they're buying it as an investment property, they can't use the VA loan. That's only for a primary residence. They can't use the FHA loan. That's only for a primary residence. So they're going to be left with basically two types of loans. One is what's called a conventional or conforming loan. And usually, though, there's some motion about that, and there may be some changes coming up very soon that allow smaller down payments. But usually, you're looking at a 20 or 25% down payment on that investment property. Pure, let's say a three-family pure investment property, you're probably looking at 25% down. There are also specialized properties, specialized mortgage um, products. And let me just mention that you had said something before about cash flow. Well, we have some loans that don't require us to look at your income. So, for example, let's say we were going to buy a property, and let's just imagine all in, it was going to cost you $4,000 a month for the mortgage, the taxes, and then the insurance. And now we're looking at a three-family property, and let's say, on a good three-family property, what would the rent roll be?
Well, if let's take a city like New Britain, which is in the geographic center of Connecticut, you're probably looking at a two, two, and two, which means two bedrooms on each floor, and you're probably looking at $2,200 a month for each floor. So two, four, six, two, four, so 4,600, or let's see, two, four, 6,000 a month.
$6,000 of rent,
Right.
and that's going to be offsetting the, let's say, $4,000 of carrying cost. Maybe it's going to be $5,000. But that does two things for you right away. Number one, it says that the property will carry itself. That's huge. In fact, in the way we just put it, if you had two, two, and two with $2,200 a unit, and in fact, if the carrying cost was $4,000, that would be almost bulletproof, right? Because even if one property was vacant for a couple of months, you'd still be able to carry it using the rental from the other two. So that'd be amazing, right?
Exactly.
And
Yep.
there is a program for that. So we have a loan program called the DSCR. And on a DSCR loan, all we have to be able to see is A, that you have the money for the down payment and you have good credit, and B, that the monthly rent exceeds the cost of the loan, and boom, you're approved. And that's a beautiful thing because now we don't have to go back and check your income. So self-employed borrower who may not show a lot of income, this would be a natural. And the other option is a traditional conventional loan. There's some disadvantages of a conventional loan here because they charge a premium for multifamily, they charge a premium for investment. So it may be expensive, but we have a bunch of options to pick from, and that's what makes this a beautiful thing. So now we have the property, and now let's talk about um, how do you look at the cash flow for something like that? So let's talk about that.
Well, I think every investor is different. They have different goals and objectives, and some investors are looking for pure cash on cash return. Other investors are looking for appreciation, long-term appreciation. So depending on what your objective is for the investment property will depend on what your goals are. We always tell first-time investors as well as repeat investors, have your model set up already. Have your profit and loss statement set up, know what you want for returns, know what you want for appreciation percentage wise. And then when we look at properties, all you have to do is put the numbers in your model and see if it makes sense. And if it makes sense, you make the offer. If it doesn't make sense, then you move on to the next property.
And critically, what you want to think about if you're going to buy a property, as opposed to a home where it's all about love.
Yeah.
Let's call a spade a spade. When you're buying a home, this is about emotion, it's about family, it's about where you're going to live, it's where you're going to maybe raise your kids. You got to be hard nosed when you look at an investment property. You really have to be just, you know, is this going to cash flow? I'm putting down $100,000 investment. What am I getting back for that investment? You may be willing to take it, say, I think this is going to be worth a lot more in 3 years, so I'm willing to forego the cash on cash return now. But you're
Mhm.
not doing a real estate investment for love. You're doing it for the numbers. So you have to be brutal in analysis. You have to make sure that you're going to get a return on your investment. You have to know what the risks are. You have to know what the tenant population is. Are you in a market where properties are going vacant for longer? And all of those things make a huge difference because this is a numbers game. It's not a love game. Okay. Um, and what are the tools that somebody might want to use in analyzing an investment property like this?
Well, we use the basic pro forma statement, a profit and loss statement. We use a cash flow analysis that can do some
Mhm.
projections over the next, say, 5 years, because that's a good time horizon to look at. And, we use those two worksheets to try to evaluate the property and see again if it fits your model, because my model may be different than your model. I might want a certain return, and you might want a lesser return because you're looking for more appreciation. And I might be looking for income, so I'm looking for a higher return on that. So again, you have to draw the line in the sand, and that's your benchmark. But those worksheets are the best, and we get our clients set up with worksheets. So all they have to do, we don't even show them property unless the numbers work ahead of time. And then if the numbers work, we have a good shot that we're going to be making an offer, and we get them right out to look at the property.
Perfect. So one of the things about the rental market in general in the Northeast, but I have a sense in a lot of the markets we're talking about, some of the housing stock is a little bit older,
Mhm.
especially the housing stock that we're talking about for three-family homes for investments. Some of that's older stock. How does that impact what you guide your clients through in selecting a property? What are the risk factors?
Well, New England is old, right? We have to accept that. And most of these double and triple deckers were built in the 1920s and 30s. And they were used for workforce housing, multi-generational housing, and they are quite old. They're 100, bordering 100-year plus old homes. So you really need to do the same type of due diligence on these properties that you do on a single family home. You want a home inspection, a structural inspection. You want to make sure you're checking lead-based paint because you have tenants that may have kids. You've got lead-based paint, lead-based pipes, you have lead pipes that could affect drinking water. So there are additional testings that we would suggest clients do when you're buying doubles and triples, just to try to protect yourself from any liability, because you know you're going to have people living in your house and you're responsible for them.
Hmm. And so choosing wisely is important. Going through the process, looking at and having a budget for repairs, right? Because
Definitely.
uh,
Reserves. Must have reserves.
having reserves, having a budget for repairs, that's going to make a huge difference. You're going to look for things like, as you said, safety issues with lead paint or lead pipes. You're going to be looking at how adequate the basic systems are, the roof, the electrical, the heating. You just want to make sure that all of those are solid. And then what you're looking for is deferred maintenance, right? Because
Right.
we were just having this conversation earlier, but it's so often in the older condos, there's deferred maintenance and the condos trying to keep the maintenance fees down, defer the maintenance. And if you're buying a condo, boy, you better be real careful to know, whether there's something, likely to come up and bite you. So now we've selected the unit and now I guess the next question is, you're going to rent it out. So talk to me about tenants. What does a first-time landlord need to know about prospective tenants and being a landlord?
Okay. Well, most of the time, if you're buying and buying a property like this, they already have tenants in place. So the
Mhm.
tenants run with the property. They have either annual leases or sometimes month-to-month leases. But it's imperative that you get copies of the leases, find out if security deposits have been set up, and because all that needs to get transferred to you at closing. You have to check to see if the tenants have been paying on time, if they're in arrears. You obviously want to inspect all their units to make sure that there hasn't been any damage done to the property. And then, look at the rents. Are the rents market rent, or is there room for improvement? That's where you could actually do well if you could buy a property right with below market rents and then have the ability to raise those rents, because they're buying the property at low market rent, so the purchase price is going to reflect that, but you can add value to that property almost instantly if you have the ability to raise rents as soon as you take ownership. Now, that's on month to month leases. If you have annual leases, you have to wait until those annuals are up. And I know, New York has some different regulations than Connecticut about raising rents, about the percentage you can raise rents. So, you have to just check with your local authorities on, how much you can raise a rent when it comes up for renewal.
Yeah, I thank you, MJ, for mentioning that because the other thing that we're finding, and it changes from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, is what are the landlord-tenant laws that are in place? Sometimes they're statewide, but sometimes they're local. And I have a friend out in the West Coast who said he'd never buy another investment property in the West Coast because the the laws are just so strong for the tenant that a prospective landlord loses their rights. And that's also true in some parts of downstate New York. But if you're looking to buy a property right now as an investment, make sure you understand what happens if the tenant stops paying rent. What will the process be? What will it cost you to uh, take the tenant to court to get them evicted? And by the way, I'll say for myself, I never want to be a landlord because I never want to have to collect rents and confront people in that way. I'm strong about a lot of things, but I think I'd personally have a hard time. So know yourself. It may mean that
Yeah.
you need a manager, or it may mean that you need someone to help you, but know the laws, know what it takes so that you buy well. Uh, what else does what are the obligations of a landlord, right? If I'm going to own this house, what are my obligations vis-a-vis the tenants?
Well, you're obligated to have the units in safe condition and adhering to all regulations, town regulations, making sure they have smoke and CO detectors, that you don't have any chipping and peeling paint, and that everything is in good working order. Not only does the town require you to keep your properties in good condition, your insurance companies are going to make an annual inspection and make sure everything's up to snuff, making sure your roofs aren't leaking, your windows are not cracked, your furnaces are serviced and cleaned. So there is a lot of responsibility on the landlord, and you can't take that responsibility lightly. It's not an easy task. If it was so easy, everybody would be landlords, right? Not everybody is a landlord, just like you said. I've owned a lot of different properties, but I always had partners, and you take your specialty. With partners, I would do the financing part, and my partner would be the rent collector. And so he was better at collecting rents, and I was better at getting the financing. So a lot of times that's an ideal setup if you have a good relationship with your partner, and it could be a familiar partner, it could be a sister, a sibling, a friend, or just another co-investor.
Hmm. And then this is a good point to talk about property managers. Now, usually we think about property managers when you've got a 40 unit property and, and it's huge and it's a lot. But even on smaller properties, there are people who will help you manage. So if your strength is, let's say you have the money for the down payment, but you decide to buy 50 miles from your home and you don't plan to drive there every Wednesday to pick up rents. There are people who are professional property managers. You give up on profitability to hire them, but now you gain the professionalism. And in many, many cases, that's a real advantage. So let's talk about why somebody would want to buy an investment property. Let's get into some of that. And it's all about wealth, isn't it?
Yeah, real estate has been proven over many, many generations. It's one of the biggest wealth generators there are, besides, stocks and bonds. But, hard assets, which we call real estate, really have propelled uh, the average person to create a lot of wealth for themselves and for future generations. We've had clients that have built multis or bought multis and have passed them down from generation to generation. And some of them are just solely that's their income. That's what they do. That's how they earn a living, is managing their properties. So it's great. It has a lot of flexibility, especially if you're hands-on and you are active, like what they call an active investor, because there's a lot of tax benefits to being an active investor as well. And you can explore those. Not everybody's up for being an active investor. There's passive investors too. And that's where the property managers come into play. Yes, they take a portion of your rent, but you don't get the call on 4th of July weekend that, there's no heat or there's no air conditioning because the circuit breaker, broke. You don't get those phone calls. So but the wealth generation is really endless. I mean, you could retire early if you get into the game. We have kids, 20-year-olds that are trying to buy a property, a multifamily every year for the next 20 years to really set themselves up. So
Right.
it really is excellent way to generate wealth and long term.
Right. And, at some point, if you have five, six, seven multifamily properties, that is a retirement plan. And as you said,
Absolutely.
I have people who are using that as a retirement plan. They've just, I have a friend who's an attorney and he's turned his back on his lucrative real estate practice real estate law practice
Yeah.
to own real estate, and that's where he's making his living today.
Yeah. It's a great way to do it.
So let's come back full circle and let's talk about the um, the option that you hinted at the beginning, but let's go into it in greater detail. We've been talking about a property so far, which let's say it's a three-family property, but all three families are rented out. Now, there's a great strategy of buying a property and living in one of the units. And so let's say, for example, you buy a three-family property, and you were talking about that earlier, where there may be a 2 over 2 over 2, right? 2 bedrooms over 2 bedrooms over 2 bedrooms. And it may have $2,200 a month per level of rent. You're going to live in one, but you're going to get two levels of rent. You're getting $4,400 a month of rent. That will go a long way towards offsetting your housing cost. And if it's your primary residence, now, if you're active duty military, if you're eligible for a VA loan, you can use VA financing to buy that property. If you're Even if you're a civilian, you can use the FHA loan, put down a very small down payment, 3.5%, buy the three-family property, fix it up, rent it out, and now you're getting owner occupied rates, even if you're going with a conventional, but let's say if you're going with an FHA, you're getting a very advantageous financing relative to the market. And now if you do that, and then 3 years later you do it again, and 3 years later you do it again, now you build your portfolio, each one building on your success of the other one, and each one cash flowing, and now you have a retirement plan.
Yeah, it's a fantastic way to get into the market. I wished my parents pushed me into a three family from day one. I went straight to the condo and I really should have went into the multifamily right from the get-go because it's true. You get in, especially a triple decker, and you get two incomes that usually will have enough to pay for the whole mortgage, and you're living there rent free, and then you could eventually segue into another property and then rent your owner occupied unit. And that's really the best way to start your real estate wealth building through multifamily.
So this has been great. Any last advice? Any last advice for our potential investor?
I think again, know your model, know what you want. You have to start with the end in mind, know what you want to generate. If do you want an income? Are you looking for appreciation? So,
How important is income today as opposed to uh, well, you can buy for income today, you
mhm.
can buy it for potential appreciation, you can buy it for low risk. So if you can't afford the risk, you can buy something that will have low risk. And all of those are great strategies. It's just what fits well for you.
Exactly. And I think there's like in Connecticut, we have the Connecticut Property Owners Association, which it's $99 a year, and you get all the benefits of their webinars. They have weekly webinars talking about landlord issues and tenant issues. And I know every state probably has this type of organization. And it's a great way for at least first-time investors to get on board and understand what kind of legislation is going on and be updated on the regs and what's changing, and doing legislative support, things like that. So that's critical that you really understand the whole your state's landlord-tenant act, real estate act, up and down, forward, backwards, all around, so that you're a well-informed investor. That will equal success.
Yeah. And as I always say, it's all about team. If you're going to go into this, if you have a good accountant, bring your accountant in early. If you have a good financial advisor, bring your financial advisor in early. Make sure you have the right realtor, somebody who A, is understands the local market, but then understands investor thought process, how to go through, how to identify a good investor property. It's not necessarily the same as the realtor who might be good at selling you a one-family home. Here's, you need somebody who has that extra depth, somebody with the experience like you do of dealing with investors. You're the unique one who knows you're one of the experts in the Connecticut market, so you know most aspects of it. But you want to do that. The other thing we haven't discussed, and just quickly, is there are commercial properties that some people buy, and let me just raise this as a potential for some people out there. Some people, instead of buying, let's say, a three-family house, might buy, let's say, a commercial unit. Sometimes they come with triple net leases. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's a built-in way to guarantee your cash flow, assuming you've done your due diligence and you're renting to a rock solid lender. But I know somebody whose model was to buy post offices,
Yep.
and they bought a post office. They had a long-term lease with the post office, triple net. So all they had to do was just collect their rent, and
It's
they were
nice.
guaranteed. Triple
Yep.
net leases means that the tenant pays the taxes, they pays the rent, but they pay their taxes, the water and sewer and
Insurance.
insurance, so that really all you're doing is collecting the net over all of that. And there are all sorts of strategies buying commercial units. We haven't addressed that, but both MJ and I would be happy to have that conversation.
Yep, absolutely. We have clients right now, they're buying early learning centers, and they cap out at 7 and somewhere 8%. So it's a really nice tool if you're in that category. And that's a much more advanced category than what we've talked about today, but it's something to look for. And maybe that could be your goal as a early investor, that will be what you do toward the middle of your investment career.
Mhm. MJ, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure. This is Dave Steinberg. Welcome to thank you for joining us on the Mortgages Made Easy podcast. MJ Agustini, great realtor in Connecticut with Remax, that you can see in her background, and we'll post her contact information. Thank you so much for joining us. If you found this valuable, like it and maybe subscribe. Thank you so much.
Thank you.